I found the first surveying mistake 3 days after moving into Meadowbrook Estates, a gated community in Gilbert, Arizona. And it made my retirement a hell of a lot more interesting than I had planned. My name is Carl Grimsby, and I spent 42 years as a land surveyor for the state of Arizona and various private firms. I had measured thousands of properties, settled countless boundary disputes, and testified in court more times than I cared to remember. When I retired at 65, I promised myself I would never touch another theodolite or GPS unit again. I bought a modest 3-bedroom ranch in what looked like a peaceful subdivision, ready to spend my days playing golf and maybe doing some woodworking in the garage. The house came with all the typical HOA restrictions, printed on 47 pages of covenants, conditions, and restrictions that my real estate agent assured me were completely normal. I skimmed through them, saw the usual nonsense about fence heights and approved paint colors, and signed on the dotted line. The previous owner had been an elderly woman who passed away, and her children were eager to sell. The price was right, the location was perfect, and I figured I could handle a few busybody neighbors telling me when to mow my lawn. I was unpacking boxes in my garage when I noticed the property marker at the back corner of my lot. It was one of those standard iron rebar stakes with a plastic cap, and something about it looked off. I told myself to let it go. I was retired. This was not my problem. But 42 years of professional habit is hard to break, and by the end of the day, I was pulling my old equipment out of storage. The next morning, I set up my GPS unit in the backyard. It took me about 20 minutes to get a precise reading on that corner marker. Then I pulled up the plat map for my property from the Maricopa County Assessor's website and compared the coordinates. The marker was 8 feet, 2 inches east of where it should have been. 8 feet exactly, plus or minus the measurement tolerance. I figured it was just my lot. Maybe the previous owner or some handyman had moved it at some point, but professional curiosity got the better of me. I spent the next week walking around the neighborhood with my equipment, checking markers wherever I could access them. Every single one I measured was off by almost exactly 8 feet in the same direction, like someone had taken the entire subdivision and shifted it during construction. This was not a small error. This was not acceptable variance. This was systematic fraud or incompetence on a massive scale. I was still trying to decide what to do about it when I got my first visit from the HOA president. Her name was Patricia Whitmore, and she showed up at my door on a Tuesday morning wearing white capri pants and a visor, holding a clipboard like it was a weapon. "Mr. Grimsby," she said, not bothering with pleasantries, "I have received multiple complaints about surveying equipment in your yard. The HOA covenants clearly state that no commercial activities are permitted on residential properties." I leaned against my doorframe and gave her a patient smile. "I am retired, Patricia. This is personal use. Personal use." She made a note on her clipboard. "You are conducting surveys of your own property, among other things. Well, your equipment is an eyesore. Several neighbors have commented. You will need to keep it in your garage when not in use." "I will take that under advisement." Her eyes narrowed. "Mr. Grimsby, the HOA rules are not suggestions. They are legally binding covenants that you agreed to when you purchased your home. If you continue to violate them, we can fine you up to $100 per day." I had dealt with difficult people my entire career. I knew how to stay calm. "Patricia, I will move my equipment, but while you are here, I need to talk to you about something important. Have you ever had the property boundaries in this subdivision professionally verified?" She blinked at me. "What are you talking about?" "The survey markers. Everyone I have checked is off by approximately 8 feet. That means property lines are wrong throughout the entire neighborhood. This is a serious legal issue. Patricia's expression shifted from annoyed to defensive in about half a second. That is absurd. This subdivision was professionally developed by Pinnacle Construction in 2008. Everything was done to code. I am sure it was supposed to be. But I am telling you, as a licensed surveyor with 4 decades of experience, that something went wrong. The markers do not match the recorded plats. Then perhaps your equipment is malfunctioning, Mr. Grimsby. Now, I expect that surveying equipment moved by the end of the day, or you will receive your first fine. She turned on her heel and walked back to her white Lexus SUV. I should have known better than to expect a reasonable response. HOA board members are not selected for their problem-solving abilities. They are selected because they have too much free time and enjoy wielding tiny amounts of power over their neighbors. I spent the next few days documenting everything. I measured every accessible property corner in the subdivision, took photographs, recorded GPS coordinates, and created a detailed map showing the discrepancy. The pattern was consistent throughout all 163 homes in Meadowbrook Estates. Every lot was shifted approximately 8 feet to the east of where it should have been according to the recorded plats. This meant several things, none of them good. First, everyone's house was technically built on the wrong part of their lot, which could affect setback requirements and building code compliance. Second, the properties along the eastern edge of the subdivision were likely encroaching on the adjacent commercial development. Third, everyone's property lines were wrong, which meant any fences, sheds, or other structures built along those lines were potentially on the wrong properties. This was the kind of mess that could tie up a subdivision in litigation for years. I compiled everything into a professional report and sent copies to Patricia, the other 4 HOA board members, and the property management company that handled the subdivision's day-to-day operations. I figured they would want to address this quietly before it became a bigger problem. Instead, I got a certified letter informing me that I was being fined $500 for spreading false information that damages property values, and that I was required to cease all surveying activities immediately or face further penalties. I called the property management company. The board receptionist transferred me to a manager named Derek, who listened to my explanation for about 30 seconds before interrupting. "Sir, I am going to be honest with you. Even if what you are saying is true, and I am not saying it is, the HOA is not going to pursue this. Do you know what it would cost to resurvey and re-record every property in that subdivision? We are talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. And for what? So property lines can be 8 feet different from where people think they are. For legal accuracy," I said. "For compliance with the recorded plats, because it is the law." "The law," Derek said, "is that HOAs have broad authority to manage their communities, and this board has decided that your survey is wrong and that you need to stop harassing them. My advice, pay the fine and drop it." I did not pay the fine. Instead, I sent a copy of my report to the Maricopa County Surveyor's Office and the Arizona Board of Technical Registration, which licenses surveyors in the state. Then I waited. The response came faster than I expected. A county surveyor named Michael Chen called me on a Friday afternoon and asked if he could come by to review my findings. He showed up the next morning with his own equipment and spent 3 hours verifying my measurements. "This is bad," he said, sitting at my kitchen table and reviewing my documentation. "This is really bad. The recorded plats clearly show one configuration, but the physical markers are all wrong. Someone screwed up during the original survey, and then everyone else just assumed the markers were correct." Can the county do anything about it? We can and we will. This is a major surveying error that affects property ownership. We will need to do a complete resurvey of the subdivision and file corrected plats. But I am warning you, this is going to piss off a lot of people. When property lines change, even by 8 feet, it causes problems. Fences end up on the wrong property. Setback violations appear. Property values can be affected. You are about to become very unpopular in your neighborhood. I am already unpopular with the HOA board, Michael smiled. Well, it is about to get worse. We will need to hold a public meeting to explain what is happening and what the correction process will involve. You should probably be there. The public meeting was scheduled for 3 weeks later at the Gilbert Community Center. In the meantime, word spread through Meadowbrook Estates like wildfire. I started getting angry phone calls from neighbors. Someone left a bag of dog feces on my doorstep. Patricia sent me another certified letter informing me that my HOA dues were being raised by $200 per month to cover legal expenses related to defending the community against frivolous claims. I contacted a real estate attorney named Sarah Sullivan, who specialized in HOA disputes. She was a sharp woman in her early 40s who had made a career out of fighting abusive homeowners associations. We met at her office in downtown Phoenix, and I walked her through everything. "They cannot raise your dues like that," she said immediately. "That is retaliatory and almost certainly violates Arizona HOA law. We can fight that easily. The bigger question is what happens when the county corrects the plats. You could end up with neighbors whose properties are suddenly different sizes than they thought. People who built fences that are now on the wrong side of the line. This is going to be a nightmare. So what do? You keep your head down and let the county handle the survey correction. Document every interaction with the HOA. If they continue to fine or harass you, we will file suit. Arizona courts are not friendly to HOAs that abuse their authority, and this board sounds like they are begging for a judicial smackdown." The public meeting drew about 200 angry homeowners, which was impressive considering only 163 homes existed in the subdivision. People brought their extended families. The mood was hostile from the moment I walked in. Michael Chen stood at the front of the room with a projector showing overlays of the recorded plats versus the actual marker positions. He was professional and patient, explaining in clear language what had happened and what the county would do to fix it. Patricia Whitmore was having none of it. She stood up during the Q&A session, her face red with anger. "This is insane. You are telling us that our property lines are wrong because some retired busybody decided to play surveyor in his backyard. Our homes have been here for 18 years. Everything has been fine. This is harassment, pure and simple." "Madam," Michael said calmly, "this is not harassment. This is correction of a significant surveying error. The property boundaries in your subdivision do not match the recorded legal descriptions. That is a serious problem that needs to be fixed." "But why?" someone else shouted from the audience. "If everything has been fine for 18 years, why change it now?" "Because the legal descriptions are what matter," Michael explained. "If any of you ever get into a property dispute with a neighbor, or if you try to sell your home and the title company does a new survey, this error will come up. It is better to fix it now in a coordinated way than to have it come up piecemeal over time." A man in the back stood up. He was probably in his 50s, wearing an expensive polo shirt. "I am Jim Davidson, and I am an attorney. What you are proposing could affect property values throughout this subdivision. Have you considered the liability exposure for the county if home values drop because of this?" "The county is correcting an error in the public record," Michael said. We have an obligation to maintain accurate property records. This is not optional." The meeting devolved into shouting after that. People wanted to know who was responsible for the original error. They wanted to know if they could sue someone. They wanted to know if their mortgages would be affected. Michael did his best to answer questions, but the crowd was more interested in having someone to blame than in understanding the technical details. I kept quiet during the meeting, but Patricia made sure everyone knew I was the one who had started this. She pointed me out to several people, and by the time I left, I had a pretty good idea that my life in Meadowbrook Estates was about to get significantly more difficult. The next morning, I found my mailbox knocked over. The day after that, someone keyed my truck. I filed police reports, but the Gilbert Police Department told me that without witnesses or camera footage, there was not much they could do. I installed security cameras. The HOA violations started coming fast after that. I got cited for my lawn being a quarter-inch too long. I got cited for parking my truck in my driveway instead of the garage, even though the covenants said nothing about that. I got cited for having a garden hose visible from the street. Each violation came with a $50 fine, and a notice that continued non-compliance could result in a lien being placed on my property. Sarah Sullivan filed a complaint with the Arizona Department of Real Estate, which oversees HOAs in the state, alleging harassment and retaliatory fines. She also sent a cease and desist letter to the HOA board and their property management company, warning them that continued harassment would result in a lawsuit. Patricia responded by calling an emergency special assessment of $1,000 per household to address boundary issues and defend the community's interests. The vote was scheduled for an HOA meeting 2 weeks out. I went to that meeting with Sarah. The community room at the subdivision's clubhouse was packed with angry homeowners, most of whom clearly blamed me for all of this. Patricia called the meeting to order and immediately moved to the special assessment vote. Sarah stood up. "Excuse me, but this special assessment appears to be retaliatory against my client, Carl Grimsby. He has done nothing wrong. He identified a serious surveying error that the county is now correcting. You cannot punish him for that." Patricia's smile was pure venom. "Miss Sullivan, this special assessment is to cover legal fees and surveying costs that the HOA will incur because of the chaos your client has created. Every homeowner here will be paying, not just Mr. Grimsby. This is about protecting our community's property values. By fighting the county's correction of an illegal survey, that is a losing battle and you know it. You are wasting HOA funds on a fight you cannot win. That is for the homeowners to decide. All in favor of the special assessment. About 70% of the hands went up. I was not surprised. People were scared and angry, and Patricia had successfully painted me as the villain. The special assessment passed, which meant I now owed the HOA an additional $1,000 on top of all the fines I was refusing to pay. The county survey took 6 weeks. A team of professional surveyors came in and re-measured every property boundary in the subdivision, using both GPS and traditional survey equipment to ensure accuracy. When they were done, Michael Chen filed corrected plats with the county recorder's office, and every property owner received a certified letter explaining the changes. The results were about what I had expected. Most properties were 8 feet narrower on the east side than the owners thought. Several properties along the eastern edge of the subdivision were now discovered to be encroaching on the commercial property next door, which was owned by a strip mall developer. 2 properties along the south edge were discovered to be partly on a drainage easement that no one had known about. And then the real trouble started. The strip mall developer, A company called Redstone Commercial Properties sent letters to the 7 homeowners whose sheds, fences, and landscaping were now confirmed to be on Redstone's property. The letters demanded immediate removal of all structures or payment of rent for the encroachment. When the homeowners refused, Redstone filed a lawsuit. 3 neighbors discovered that their shared fence line was actually 3 feet inside one property, making that homeowner's yard significantly smaller than they had thought, and the neighbor's yard larger. They started fighting about who would pay to move the fence. One homeowner discovered that his expensive patio, which he had built right up to what he thought was his property line, was actually 2 feet onto his neighbor's land. The neighbor, who hated him because of an unrelated dispute about a barking dog, demanded he tear it up. The HOA, facing mounting legal costs and angry homeowners, voted to sue Pinnacle Construction, the original developer, for negligent survey work. Pinnacle had dissolved in 2012 after the housing crash, but the HOA's lawyers argued they could go after the insurance company that had bonded the project. And through all of this, Patricia Whitmore kept finding new ways to make my life miserable. The fines kept coming. My truck got keyed 2 more times. Someone threw a rock through my front window. The Gilbert police finally assigned an officer to patrol my street more frequently, but they still had no leads on who was responsible. I was sitting in my living room one evening, watching the news and wondering if retiring to this subdivision had been the worst decision of my life, when my doorbell rang. I checked the security camera and saw a woman I did not recognize. She was maybe in her late 30s, professional-looking, holding a folder. I opened the door. "Can I help you, Mr. Grimsby? My name is Rachel Torres. I am an investigative reporter with the Arizona Republic. I have been following the situation in your subdivision, and I would love to talk to you about it." I invited her in. We sat in my living room and I walked her through the whole story, from finding the first marker error to the current mess. She took notes and asked smart questions. "This is fascinating," she said. "Do you mind if I ask why you even checked the markers in the first place? Most people would not notice something like that." Professional habit. I was a surveyor for 42 years. When I saw that marker in my backyard, something about it just looked wrong. I could not let it go. "And now you are being harassed by your HOA because you identified a serious legal problem that needed to be fixed." That about sums it up. Rachel's story ran on the front page of the Arizona Republic's local section 3 days later. It was a well-researched piece that explained the surveying error, the county's correction process, and the HOA's retaliatory campaign against me. She had interviewed Michael Chen, Sarah Sullivan, several other homeowners, and had even gotten Patricia Whitmore on record saying some remarkably stupid things about how so-called experts were ruining the neighborhood. The story went viral. Local TV news picked it up. I gave interviews to 3 different stations. Suddenly, Patricia and the HOA board were the villains, and I was the retired surveyor who had tried to do the right thing. The court of public opinion shifted fast. Other homeowners in Meadowbrook Estates started reaching out to me, apologizing for how they had treated me and asking questions about their own property lines. Some of them were furious with the HOA board for wasting money on a fight they could not win instead of helping homeowners deal with the boundary changes. A recall petition started circulating to remove Patricia and 2 other board members. It needed signatures from 20% of homeowners to trigger a recall election, and it got there in less than a week. But Patricia was not going down without a fight. The HOA filed a defamation lawsuit against me and the Arizona Republic, claiming that the article had damaged the community's reputation and property values. It was a ridiculous lawsuit that was clearly meant to intimidate, but it still meant I had to spend time and money defending myself. Sarah Sullivan was practically gleeful when she called me about it. This is exactly what we needed. They just handed us a slap suit on a silver platter. A what? Strategic lawsuit against public participation. Arizona has an anti-SLAPP statute that protects people from being sued for speaking out on matters of public interest. We can get this case dismissed quickly, and the HOA will have to pay your attorney fees. They just made a huge mistake. She was right. We filed an anti-SLAPP motion, and the judge dismissed the HOA's lawsuit about 6 weeks later, calling it a transparent attempt to silence legitimate criticism. The judge ordered the HOA to pay my legal fees, which came to about $14,000. The recall election happened 2 months after that. Patricia Whitmore, along with board members Karen Stephenson and Linda Martinez, were all removed from office. The new board president was a reasonable guy named Tom Chen, an engineer who had been one of the first people to apologize to me after the news story broke. Tom called me the day after he took office. "Carl, I want to apologize on behalf of the HOA for how you were treated. The previous board's actions were unacceptable. We are going to rescind all the fines they levied against you, and we are going to work with homeowners to address the boundary issues constructively instead of fighting reality." I appreciate that, Tom. I never wanted any of this. I just wanted to fix a problem. I know, and you were right. The county surveyors confirmed everything you said. We should have listened from the start. The new board hired a civil engineering firm to help homeowners understand their corrected property boundaries and to mediate disputes. They set up a fund to help homeowners who needed to move fences or structures because of the boundary changes. They dropped the lawsuit against Pinnacle Construction's insurance company because their lawyers told them it was unlikely to succeed and would just waste more money. Slowly, things in Meadowbrook Estates started to return to normal. Most of the boundary disputes got worked out. The homeowners who were encroaching on Redstone commercial properties reached a settlement that allowed them to keep their structures in place in exchange for a modest one-time payment. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. About 4 months after the recall election, I got a call from an attorney named Marcus Webb. He explained that he represented 3 other homeowners associations in the Gilbert area, all of them developed by Pinnacle Construction around the same time as Meadowbrook Estates. He wanted to know if I would be willing to check the survey markers in those subdivisions. "What makes you think they have the same problem?" I asked. "Because Pinnacle used the same surveying subcontractor for all their projects in 2007 and 2008. If they screwed up Meadowbrook Estates, they probably screwed up others." I was retired. I had promised myself I was done with surveying work. But I also could not stand the idea of other communities having the same problem and not knowing about it. I checked the markers in the first subdivision, Saguaro Springs, and found the exact same error. Everything shifted 8 feet to the east. The second subdivision, Desert Willows, had the same problem. The third, Canyon Ridge, was shifted 8 feet to the north instead of east, but the magnitude of the error was identical. It became clear that the surveying company Pinnacle had used, a firm called Precision Land Surveys, had been making systematic errors across multiple projects. Precision had gone out of business in 2010, but the damage they had done was still affecting thousands of homeowners. I prepared reports for all 3 subdivisions and submitted them to the county. Michael Chen was not happy to see me again, but he acknowledged that the errors needed to be corrected. The county started the process of re-surveying all 3 communities. Marcus Webb filed a class action lawsuit against Precision Land Survey's insurance carrier, seeking damages for all the homeowners affected by the survey errors. He asked me to serve as an expert witness. I agreed. The legal battle took almost 2 years. The insurance company fought hard, arguing that the statute of limitations had expired, and that the homeowners had suffered no real damages since the errors had gone unnoticed for so long. Our side argued that the errors represented a latent defect that was only discovered when proper surveys were conducted, and that the statute of limitations should run from the date of discovery, not the date of the original error. The judge sided with us. The insurance company ended up settling for $12 million, which was distributed among the affected homeowners in all 4 subdivisions. Each homeowner got about $4,000, which helped offset the costs of dealing with boundary changes and moving structures. Patricia Whitmore, meanwhile, had moved out of Meadowbrook Estates about 6 months after the recall election. I heard through the neighborhood gossip that she and her husband had divorced and that she had relocated to Scottsdale. Karen Stephenson and Linda Martinez were still living in the subdivision but kept low profiles. Life in Meadowbrook Estates finally settled down. The boundary issues were resolved. The new HOA board was reasonable and focused on actual community maintenance instead of petty enforcement. I got to know several of my neighbors, and most of them turned out to be decent people who had just been scared and misinformed. I was working in my garage one Saturday afternoon, about 3 years after I had first moved in, when Tom Chen stopped by. He was carrying a bottle of good scotch. "Hey, Carl, you got a minute?" "Sure." "What's up?" He handed me the bottle. "This is from the HOA board. We wanted to thank you properly for everything you did. I know it was not easy, and I know we put you through hell before we came to our senses." "You didn't put me through hell, Tom. Patricia and her crew did that." "Fair point. But still, you stuck to your guns when everyone was telling you to shut up and go away. You were right, and you made us face an uncomfortable truth. That takes integrity." I opened the bottle and poured us each a glass. "To uncomfortable truths." "To uncomfortable truths," he echoed. We sat in my garage, drinking scotch and talking about the subdivision, about the crazy journey we had all been on, and about how communities can lose their minds when fear and misinformation take over. Tom told me that the whole experience had taught the neighborhood a valuable lesson about the importance of questioning authority and not just blindly trusting the HOA board. "We actually rewrote our covenants," he said. "Made it easier to recall board members, added more transparency requirements, put limits on fines and special assessments. Meadowbrook Estates is a better community now because of what happened." "That is good to hear. I was worried I had just made everyone's lives worse." "You made things difficult for a while, but you also made things right. There is a difference." After Tom left, I sat in my garage for a while, looking at my old surveying equipment in the corner. I had kept it all this time, even though I had barely used it after that first year. Professional tools from a professional life that I thought I had left behind. I realized then that I had never really stopped being a surveyor. It was not just a job I had done for 42 years. It was who I was. I measured things. I checked boundaries. I made sure the lines were where they were supposed to be. Not because I enjoyed conflict or wanted attention, but because accuracy mattered. Because the truth mattered, even when it was inconvenient. The sun was setting over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. I finished my scotch and thought about all the chaos that had started from one simple observation. That marker in my backyard was 8 feet off. Such a small thing, really. 8 feet out of an entire subdivision. Most people would have never noticed, and if they had noticed, they would have shrugged and moved on. But 8 feet mattered. In surveying, in property law, in life, the details mattered. The small discrepancies left unchecked became big problems. And someone had to be willing to point them out, even when it made them unpopular. A year later, I was elected to the HOA board. I had not wanted the position, but several neighbors had encouraged me to run, and I figured that after everything that had happened, I should probably give back to the community in some way. My role was mostly advisory, helping the board think through decisions and avoid the kinds of petty authoritarianism that had characterized Patricia's tenure. It was strange being on the other side of things. I attended monthly board meetings, reviewed architectural applications, and dealt with homeowner complaints. Most of them were reasonable. Some were not. I tried to remember what it had felt like to be on the receiving end of unreasonable HOA enforcement, and I used that memory to guide my decisions. One evening, about a year and a half into my board service, we got an application from a homeowner who wanted to build a casita in his backyard. The proposed structure was technically within the allowable setbacks according to the corrected property boundaries, but it would be very close to his neighbor's fence line. "This is going to cause problems," one board member said. "The neighbor is going to complain." "But it meets the requirements," I pointed out. "If the setbacks are legal, we do not have grounds to deny it." "We could require additional landscaping as a buffer," another board member suggested. We went back and forth for a while, trying to find a solution that would allow the homeowner to build his casita while addressing potential neighbor concerns. Eventually, we approved the application with a condition that the homeowner meet with his neighbor first to discuss the plans and address any concerns. It was the kind of common sense decision that Patricia's board would never have made. They would have either denied it arbitrarily or approved it without any thought to the consequences. The new board tried to find reasonable middle ground. After the meeting, Tom walked out to the parking lot with me. "You know," he said, "I think you have finally forgiven us for what happened when you first moved in. What makes you say that? Because you are volunteering your time to make this community better instead of just staying angry. That takes a bigger person than I might have been in your situation." I thought about that as I drove home. Had I forgiven the community? I supposed I had. Most of my neighbors had just been scared and confused, manipulated by a board that had prioritized control over doing the right thing. They had come around eventually, once they understood what was really happening. That deserved forgiveness. Patricia, though, I was not sure I had forgiven her. She had been vindictive and petty, more concerned with maintaining her authority than with addressing a real problem. She had turned the neighborhood against me, wasted HOA funds on frivolous litigation, and made my life miserable for months. That was harder to let go. But I realized that my inability to forgive Patricia did not matter much anymore. She was gone, living her life somewhere else, probably making some other community miserable. I was still here, in the house I had chosen for my retirement, surrounded by neighbors who had become friends. I had won, not by destroying her, but by simply being right and refusing to back down. The surveying errors had all been corrected. The lawsuits had been settled. The bad board members had been recalled. Life in Meadowbrook Estates had moved on, and I had learned that retirement did not mean stopping work that mattered. It just meant choosing different work that served the community and made things better. 5 years after I had first moved to Gilbert, I was sitting on my back patio with Sarah Sullivan. She had become a friend over the years, someone I could call when I needed legal advice or just wanted to grab lunch with someone who understood the insanity of HOA law. "You ever regret it?" she asked. checking those markers in the first place. Your life would have been a lot simpler if you had just ignored it. I watched a hummingbird dart between the desert flowers in my garden. No, I said. I do not regret it. It was the right thing to do. Sometimes the right thing is complicated and messy and makes people angry. But it is still right. Spoken like someone who has made peace with being a pain in the ass, I laughed. I prefer principled advocate for accuracy. Sure, that is what all the pains in the ass say. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, drinking iced tea and watching the desert afternoon fade into evening. Sarah eventually left, and I stayed on the patio, thinking about the journey I had been on since moving to this community. I had come to Gilbert looking for peace and quiet, for a simple retirement where the biggest challenge would be whether to play golf in the morning or the afternoon. Instead, I had found myself in the middle of a subdivision-wide crisis, targeted by a vindictive HOA board, and ultimately embroiled in class action litigation affecting thousands of homeowners. It had been stressful and frustrating and sometimes frightening, but it had also been meaningful. I had used my expertise to identify a serious problem and see it through to resolution. I had stood up to bullies and won. I had helped make my community better, and in the process, I had learned that retirement did not mean stopping. It just meant choosing what mattered. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the desert sky turned deep purple. Lights came on in houses throughout Meadowbrook Estates, families settling in for the evening. My neighbors, going about their lives in homes with accurate property boundaries, thanks to one retired surveyor who could not leave well enough alone. I smiled and raised my glass of iced tea to the empty desert air. To uncomfortable truths, I said quietly, and to 8 feet. Because sometimes, 8 feet makes all the difference. The following months brought a sense of normalcy that I had not experienced since moving in. The corrected property boundaries became simply the way things were, no longer a source of neighborhood controversy. New homeowners moving into the subdivision received accurate plats from the start. Old disputes had been settled. Life moved on. I continued serving on the HOA board, and Tom and I became good friends. We played golf most Saturday mornings, and he often joked that I was the most expensive golf partner he had ever had, considering how much that initial survey correction had cost the community in stress and legal fees. But he always said it with a smile. The other subdivisions I had surveyed went through similar processes. Saguaro Springs, Desert Willows, and Canyon Ridge all had their boundaries corrected, their own HOA battles fought, and their own recalls and reforms. I served as an expert witness in several additional lawsuits, helping homeowners understand what had happened and why the corrections were necessary. Marcus Webb told me I should start charging for my consulting work, that I had developed a unique expertise in identifying and correcting large-scale survey errors. But I did not need the money, and I enjoyed helping people. I kept my services free, treating it as community service in my retirement. One afternoon, I got a call from Michael Chen at the county surveyor's office. "Carl, I need your help with something. We have been getting reports of possible survey errors in an older subdivision in Chandler, developed in the late 1990s. Would you be willing to take a look?" I grabbed my equipment and drove to Chandler that afternoon. The subdivision was called Heritage Park, a community of about 200 homes that had been built between 1997 and 1999. I spent a week checking markers and comparing them to recorded plats. The errors were different this time. Instead of a consistent 8-foot shift, the mistakes were scattered and inconsistent, suggesting sloppiness rather than a systematic problem. Some markers were correct. Others were off by anywhere from 2 to 12 feet in various directions. It was a mess, but a different kind of mess from what I had found in Meadowbrook Estates. I prepared my report and submitted it to the county. Michael thanked me and told me the county would begin the correction process. I braced myself for another round of angry homeowners and HOA battles, but Heritage Parks Board turned out to be reasonable. They worked with the county proactively, communicating with homeowners and helping facilitate the corrections without drama. It made me realize that the problem with Meadowbrook Estates had not really been the survey errors themselves. It had been Patricia Whitmore and a board that prioritized control over truth. In Heritage Park, a reasonable board made all the difference. I was having dinner with Tom and his wife Jennifer one evening, and the conversation turned to Patricia. Neither of us had heard from her in years, though occasionally someone would mention that they had seen her around Scottsdale. "You ever wonder what she is doing?" Jennifer asked. "Not really," I said. "I hope she has found a community where her management style works better, though I am not sure such a place exists." Tom laughed. "I heard through a friend that she tried to join the HOA board in her new neighborhood and got voted down. Apparently her reputation preceded her." "Karma is real," Jennifer said, raising her wine glass. We toasted to that and moved on to happier topics. As I drove home that night, I thought about how the past several years had changed me. I had come to Gilbert as a retired professional, looking to leave my old life behind. Instead, I had been pulled back into that life in an unexpected way, using my skills to solve a problem I had not been looking for. But in doing so, I had found purpose. I had found community. I had learned that expertise mattered, that standing up for truth mattered, and that sometimes one person refusing to back down could change things for the better. The lights of Gilbert stretched out before me as I drove through the quiet streets. Somewhere in one of these subdivisions, there might be another survey error waiting to be discovered. Another set of property markers off by 8 feet or 10 feet or 12. Another community living with a latent defect they did not know existed. And if someone found it, if someone called me and asked for help, I would grab my equipment and get to work. Because that was who I was, a surveyor, someone who measured boundaries and made sure the lines were where they were supposed to be. I pulled into my driveway in Meadowbrook Estates and sat in my truck for a moment, looking at my house. My home, with its accurate property boundaries and its place in a community that had been through fire and come out stronger. I thought about that first marker I had seen in my backyard, the one that had started everything. That small piece of rebar and plastic that had looked just slightly wrong to my trained eye. Most people would have walked past it without a second thought, but I had stopped. I had measured. I had checked. And because I had checked, 163 families now had accurate property boundaries. 4 subdivisions had been corrected. Thousands of homeowners had received settlement money to help address the problems caused by sloppy survey work. A vindictive HOA board had been removed from power. Reforms had been implemented, all because of 8 feet. I got out of my truck and walked into my house, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. Retirement had not been what I expected. It had been better. More challenging, more meaningful, more connected to the community around me. I poured myself a glass of that scotch Tom had given me years ago, the bottle still half full. I raised it to the empty kitchen. To 8 feet, I said again, and to uncomfortable truths. Then I drank and I smiled and I looked forward to whatever tomorrow would bring, because in the end the story was simple. A retired surveyor moved into an HOA and found that every boundary marker was off by 8 feet. He reported it. The HOA fought him. The truth won. And a community learned that accuracy mattered more than convenience, that one person standing up for what was right could make a difference, and that sometimes the smallest discrepancies revealed the biggest problems. It was a good story, and I was proud to have lived it.